Hello, everyone. So nice to see you to our second talk show as part of the series dedicated to the Routledge International Handbook of Engineering Ethics Education. We have with us today Olga Pierakkos from Wake Forest University, USA, Irene Josa from University College London in the UK, and John B. Kleba from Istituto Tecnológico de Aeronáutica, Brazil, to talk about sustainability and the many dimensions of sustainability in engineering education. And this is intended to be a lively session. You can see some rules of engagement that have been posted on the chat to facilitate interaction with participants via the Q&A stream on your Microsoft tab. So we will take questions towards the second half of the meeting via the Q&A stream, and we welcome any discussions among yourself and ways for you to interact and share experience and ideas via our lively chat. Before we move to the talk show, I want to give the floor to Shannon Chance, the leading editor of the handbook, to introduce us to this volume. And I will put links to the volume, which is open access, and to the chapters that are represented today in this conversation.
So thank you so much for joining us today. We are really happy to see such a lively and engaged group coming to our talk shows. Today, we're going to be hearing from the authors of this recently published handbook, the Routledge International Handbook of Engineering Ethics Education. The talk show today will be hosted by Diana Martin. She's one of our 6 editors. And I want to let you know that the book is open access. If you use the QR code that's showing on Deanna's screen and my screen, it will bring you straight to the publisher's webpage where you can get a free download of either the entire book or any chapter that interests you. Those will be PDFs that you can use on all kinds of formats, digital devices. This was a project that was done by the SEFI Ethics SIG. And we had 6 editors, all based in SEFI, but we also had authors we had 99 other authors joining us from all around the globe. So we want to welcome you to explore the content, to provide feedback, and to get involved in applying this content, but also extending it. We want to grow this community. You could get involved, for instance, by joining us in Dublin. Diana and I are 2 of the 3 organizers for the 2025 Ethics Spring School that will be in the south part of Dublin, March 25th through 27th. So there are a couple of seats left on that, and I will give you my email address in the chat so that you can let me know if you'd like to join us. Thank you so much. And Diana, could you take it away?
Yes, thank you, Shannon, for the introduction to this volume, which originated as a community project. And here we are again as a community to discuss important ideas and important ways to move our discipline forward. And I want to invite our 3 speakers today to introduce briefly their chapter and highlight connection between the chapter and the theme of sustainability. Irene, I give you the floor for this introduction.
Yes, so hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to have been part of this big endeavor, the handbook. So my name is Irene Josa. I'm currently a lecturer at the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction at University College London, UCL, and my background is a mix between civil engineering and human rights. My current research and teaching is related to sustainability within construction and civil engineering. And because of this background, so the chapter I worked on within the Routledge Handbook was the one on ethical considerations within civil engineering, which was co-authored together with Cristina Nix at University of Leeds and Esther Jiménez Carbó at the Technical University of Valencia. So what will you find in our chapter? It was a challenging chapter to write because there were so many ethical considerations and topics that we wanted to include in the chapter, but in the end, it was one chapter, so we were a bit limited. So what we decided to do was to give an overview of all the ethical considerations and key ethical topics that we might find when we are dealing with civil engineering. So in particular, we discuss 6 main themes, 6 topics, which are professionalism, social responsibility, sustainability, health and safety, equality, diversity and inclusion, and decolonization. And what we do is introducing these topics and key literature. And importantly, we also have a case study developed so that educators can bring to class these examples or debates and use it really like as a tangible material that can help them bring these ethical discussions in class. We deal with different parts of the life cycle of engineering projects and the ethical considerations that arise during the design of a construction project, during the construction itself, during the operation, and during the commissioning. And in the end, it's quite linked to sustainability because the skills that are needed for ethical decision making, which are critical thinking, reflection, etc., are very much closely related to broader societal and environmental sustainability implications. And this consideration of introducing ethical decision-making processes at different stages is also very much linked with our responsibility as engineers towards the society, environment, and future generations, which I think we'll be discussing now later during the discussion. Diana, you're
thank you. Thank you, Irene, for walking us through your chapter. Olga, can you tell us something about your contribution to the volume?
Yes, thank you very much. Wonderful opportunity to be here with you all. A bit about my background. So I served as the founding chair of Building Wake Forest Engineering with a commitment to educating the whole engineer and integrating liberal arts across the curriculum. I'm also serving at a federal level here in the US, serving as a STEM education program director. So I'm also sort of paying attention to what's happening nationally and internationally. The chapter that I wrote with my colleagues and like Irene, it was not easy. I really appreciated just the challenge and the process that the editors guided us through to think about and connect ideas that we typically do not connect. And I think that's the opportunity that was made visible in doing this work. And so our chapter was all about thinking about attitudes and character in connection to ethics and taking a virtue ethic lens to the work that we do. And that very much is connected to sustainability and the conversation today. We primarily also focused on understanding how we assess attitudes and character in the context of engineering practice and engineering education. And so we took a case-based approach of showing different examples that we see in engineering education globally in the ways that we can do that. Ultimately, what we concluded is there's much opportunity for growth in the same way that we still need to find ways to connect the dots and help our students really understand their role as they learn and practice engineering and building these connections to cultivating character, but doing it with the intention of benefiting society. And that's where sustainability naturally comes in, contextualizing it. But the opportunity is that we can continue to integrate these ideas much more broadly across curricula, because we didn't find as many examples of that across curricula. But we also need to improve our methodology in measuring and continuing to sort of help faculty continue to activate these important learning competencies that our engineers need. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. And John, please introduce us to your chapter. We can't hear. We're not sure if everything is good technically on your side.
The image looks frozen to me.
Oh yes. Actually, I don't see his screen.
Sorry.
See. Thinking
Maybe
maybe
we should go on to the next question, and once he's back in, we can keep an eye for his entry at the top.
Yes, and just as a reminder for those who joined us after the session started, please use the Q&A tab to address any questions or to interact in the plenary with the speakers, and the chat for sharing your thoughts, experiences, or discussions among yourselves, and that will help us streamline the conversation. Now, I want to tap into the expertise of our guest speakers and to explore together ways in which you have understood sustainability and brought this understanding into the education of engineering students. And my first question that you can also see on the website, as it was circulated in advance of the meeting, is how can engineering education balance global sustainability goals and the global vision of engineering education with solutions that are localized and community driven?
And I see John has joined us again, so.
Yeah, shall I try?
Hi, John, yes, are you, everything good?
Yeah, that's good, yeah. Sorry for that. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. And well, I wrote with colleagues chapter 9 is about sociological, postcolonial, and critical theory foundations of engineering ethics education. This is written with Robert Brown and Richard Rundell, me. And the chapter is about, well, we depart from the idea that engineers are actually tacit sociologists and also tacit ethicists. They have specific views on the social order, about rights and wrongs of human behaviors. However, these views are often not informed by critical reflection. For example, there's widespread beliefs in value neutrality of technology. Sociology gives us valuable tools not only to deconstruct such common sense views, but also to reflect on how engineering is a co-producer of goods and bads in society. So it should be part of all engineering education curriculum. In our chapter, we present 3 crucial sociological approaches, and they are critical theory, postcolonial theory, and science and technology and society studies. Quite a lot. So critical theory has had its origin in the Frankfurt School in the 1930s. With authors like Horkheimer, Adorno, and Marcuse. Today, critical theory has a much broader definition encompassing contemporary approaches associated with social movements, such as gender studies, critical race theory, class analysis, feminist critique, and also climate justice and environmental racism. Science and technology studies has developed critical approaches to science and technology from a variety of disciplines, asking how it is produced, legitimized, and understood in the public sphere. One core idea of STS is that technology enacts political choices reproducing structures of injustice and exclusion. Post-colonial studies challenges the narrative of techno-scientific modernity, having questioning the model of development to guide all nations and societies, which is Western-based. Here by Western, we mean European and US colonial and imperialistic powers. Neocolonialism acts in at least 3 ways against other cultural worlds: disparaging, erasing, making it invisible. It obliterates minorities, the languages, the living spaces, accelerated extinction of cultures and biodiversity, and makes invisible the representatives of marginalized cultures, hindering their political articulations towards other possible worlds. So STS, I'm finishing, STS and post-colonial critique come together when highlighting 2 critiques: the epistemological, that means ways of knowing the world, and the ontological, referring to ways of seeing the world. So we must learn, value, and dialogue with non-hegemonic ways of seeing and knowing the world. And this includes critical approaches and how modern capitalistic societies relate to the environment. Well, okay.
Thank you, John. And I think now we have a thread of how sustainability and the environmental angle has been introduced in our handbook, although not exhaustively. As Shannon mentioned, there are other chapters that are dealing with this topic, including the one that Shannon and Tom Borson and Gaston Meskens co-authored. We are now moving into Q&A time, and this will be structured first with questions from me, and then we'll open also to questions from the audience. And the first question that I was asking while John was getting, again, technical access to our meeting space was about the interplay between the global dimension of sustainability and the global vision, and let's say a unifying vision of engineering, and what are localized and community-oriented dimensions. Is there a tension or a balance between the drive towards global solutions and the need for local solutions? I want to gather your thoughts, and I'm thinking this might be a good question in continuation of John's presentation, which had a social justice angle. And I want to ask you, John, how do you perceive this tension or balance, also in terms of the justice dimension of sustainability? I think you need to unmute yourself, John.
Sorry, thank you, Diana. So I think a first remark is the classical slogan of the ecological movement: think globally, act locally, doesn't apply anymore. We must, side by side with act locally, we must think and involve people's knowledge and culture locally. So there's a new slogan, so updated, because post-colonial critique in STS make us aware that engineering design practice must depart from local particularities. So it's essential to be critical to a technocracy that is imposing top-down solutions instead of involving local peoples into decision-making, and also of this idea of technology and science as universal solutions that apply everywhere. That is, we shouldn't strive solutions detached from looking at these local particularities. So this is the first remark, but I think I also have researched for a long time the Convention of Biological Diversity linked to the rights of indigenous and local communities towards the knowledge which is used by biotech industries such as pharmaceuticals and cosmetics. I was working in Germany with an international lawyer, and I think global alliances, global regulatory frameworks such as treaties, international law, being binding or non-binding, and international organizations working with accountability, political pressure at the macro level are essential tools as far as they facilitate and promote local struggles towards strong sustainability and against other political perspectives such as ecological and climate denialism.
Thank you, John. And before getting the insights of Olga and Irene, I just want to continue this dialogue with you and to ask whether you consider that global is global another term for colonial when we are thinking of the hegemony of engineering powers and engineering education powers, accreditation powers that are dominating or creating the field and norms and standards.
And you're directing the question to John?
Yes, it was a follow-up to John.
To me again, sorry, I was expecting that more people would share with me.
Yes, I was interacting to,
I think
what you were saying.
At the beginning of the human rights idea, short after the World War II, the American Anthropologists Association was very skeptical, thinking relating the idea of human rights, universal human rights, as a kind of colonialism, new colonialism. And today they have changed their mind, and I think this shows us a lot because universal human rights they have recognized they are fundamental to protect cultural minorities. So cultural minorities are very vulnerable in all senses. And today we can see that often legal tools are taken at national, regional level to protect the rights of these peoples in many occasions. So I will stop here.
Thank you for your perspective, and I want just to highlight Ivan da Costa Marquez' point that the global is the local of the dominant collective. Olga, what are your thoughts on the dichotomy between local and global and what it may mean for sustainability, education, and sustainability-oriented solutions?
Yes, thanks, Diana, and I really appreciate the conversation. I think it requires both perspectives. I think it's important for our students. I think it's important to take a student-centered approach and to meet them where they're at. Oftentimes, we may need to start at a more local level to see how technological solutions might impact them directly or might impact the communities they're part of directly, but also interplay between both sort of the global context and the local solutions. And as John pointed out, take a very critical approach to analyzing what are the differences. I know that with the curriculum I've been part of building, we've played that out. We change the context and invite students to critically think about the implications of that. And so I think both perspectives are really essential for students to get the depth and breadth of learning that is really essential. And then the more we can infuse that with these contextual approaches, these cultural implications, environmental impacts, the social impacts, and help them understand the differences, learn from case studies, and really understand where successes have happened and where failures have happened. So I don't see it as, I think a diversity of examples is what our students need to see and experience. And the more they can connect with those that directly are impacted by those technological solutions is also essential. And so we've often brought in the curriculum I've built at Wake Forest with my colleagues, we've done this very collaboratively. We've invited even anthropologists to come and social scientists and philosophers and policy experts to come in the classroom, the engineering classroom, to help students see these other layers that we typically do not cover, that they may see in another class that's separate from engineering. And it's so important for them to do that and to hear that and to see the value that engineers play with those perspectives. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. And Irene, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I completely subscribe to what Olga and John mentioned. To me, this let's say challenge, you mentioned the tension or balance, right? So sometimes it's one and sometimes there's the tension and sometimes we move towards the same direction. But these differences, I think, help in class to discuss with students challenges that are affecting us worldwide, such as climate change, and then introduce maybe aspects related to unequal impacts of these sustainability issues. But then once that international and global perspective is given, and talking about context and how different contexts and different parts of the world are impacted differently by different actions, which are not always in the same location. So how CO2 emissions are generated in a part of the world, and these impacts are different or differential in different, let's say, regions. Just an example that I tend to use, and I guess because it's what I work on, is on decarbonization and circular economy. So moving towards, let's say, net zero goals, and how it, let's say, there's a tension with circularity. Circular economy tends to be something more related, let's say, locally. This can be argued, but it's related to consumption of resources, waste generation, etc. And that's something that happens in general in a localized way. But then how that conflicts with broader carbon zero and carbon reduction goals. I think that's just to give an example of how I would bring these tensions to class. I think that's an interesting perspective to give, and which we discuss also in the chapter that we wrote.
Thank you for this insight. As I think it is also a matter of the ethics of education to ask ourselves what are the values and whose values do we impart when we teach about ethics and when we teach ethical theories or when we teach sustainability. And I think this builds a nice bridge to the next question, which is about how you view the role of the colonial perspectives in rethinking engineering education for sustainability. And I want to ask who would like to pick up on this question.
Well, I can start. So in the case of infrastructure projects, decolonial perspectives can help encourage students to reflect on what the colonial legacies are and how they are embedded in infrastructure projects, so we can change education and how engineering is done, but the truth is that infrastructure projects are there for many, many years, right? So trying to reflect on that and how civil engineering has historically been using exploitative systems, and how these histories are still reflected in some of the contemporary engineering projects. That's a critical reflection to do in class with students, and how global power dynamics, supply chains, material choices in the case of construction continue to perpetuate inequalities. In the case of our chapter, we talk about a specific case. So after discussing these decolonial perspectives in civil engineering and how we can encourage this reconsideration of the historical context and ongoing power dynamics, we specifically talk about the central corridor in Tanzania, and how it was built to export resources from the country, and how that currently is felt and perceived in there. So I think bringing these very specific examples in class, that's something that, at least for the courses that I've taught and the students I've interacted with, that students appreciate, to understand and to start to be more conscious about how these projects have reinforced perpetuated historical inequalities.
Thank you, Irene. Olga, I see you.
I'll add, and for me, this question is about sort of power and realizing, and John talked about this, and just now Irene too, with examples. It's challenging and recognizing that power structures exist in all of our organizations, exist in the work that takes place by engineers, by the ecosystems that in all structures, right? And so the responsibility that we have from an ethical lens and thinking about sustainability is recognizing those power structures that exist, and realizing also that if engineers are implicated in that, what role do they play to distribute that power so that the benefits can also be dispersed in an equitable way across the communities that need to. So for me, oftentimes it's just challenging the power structures that exist, and we can even start at thinking about the classroom environment to realize that the traditional way upon which we have educated students, where there's a hierarchy between the educator, the teacher, and the student, also needs to change. And we've learned through research that more student-centered pedagogies help students learn better, right? When we break down the sort of power structures. So we can take that from an example of sort of the classroom to think about how do engineers operate in their day-to-day work, right? Who are they pulling in for knowledge and expertise to make the critical decisions that they make? And in other cases, it's also realizing that there's areas where engineers themselves may feel powerless to actually do the right thing in key situations, when there's other players who are imposing values that do not sort of share the responsibility that it needs to be sort of more equitable, more inclusive, and distributing the power. So for me, that's kind of how I interpreted the question. It's about sort of the power structures that exist in every layer of what we do. And so, yeah, I'll just stop there.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing this the issue of power, as this is, I think, at the core of what we are discussing here. Power also at the level of transnational actors and institutional actors. John, I know you also have a lot of experience working on the colonial perspective, so I'm curious about your insights on this question.
Yeah, I much align with what my colleagues already said. I agree very much on the issues of power and decision making. And I think it's tricky, is a difficult question. The best way to approach will be the ideal, but not so easy to have, is to offer students a time living with communities in completely different cultural settings. So where they can think together and develop solutions, be immersed in a different culture, so to get away of our cultural bias. Cultural bias has been built all our lives. So how we are able to work to refrain from our cultural bias, thinking that our ways of doing are the best, but very often simply not knowing other ways of doing things, of thinking things, and so on. So I think there are now a great variety of approaches. We cite some approaches in our chapter, the post-colonial approaches, and depending on what you are interested in, you can go further. For example, Latin American author called Arturo Escobar writes about rights of nature and post-development. So rethinking development is an essential issue. What is sustainable and culturally inclusive development. And there is another chapter in the handbook, I think it's chapter 8, also talking about post-colonial approaches like Buen Vivir in Latin America, Ubuntu in South Africa, and other global South ideas, which are very rich, to know more about it. And if you are interested in Buen Vivir, which is quite a broad concept, there has been recently an issue of International Journal of Engineering, Social Justice and Peace, a special issue on Buen Vivir. I would maybe also introduce case studies, so tricky, difficult ones like conflicts between indigenous peoples from Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Colombia, who are defenders of the forest. They need the forest, and if you see satellite images, green spots are often indigenous reserves. So they conflicts with big engineering projects like oil exploitation. So there's many things going on, and as engineers, I think you may ask, what is the right thing to do? For one aspect, I think rights of self-determination, respect the rights of those peoples over the territories they have lived for so long, ancestral rights. But it's always with in Latin American countries with this touch of we want to be so rich and developed like the North countries. So on the way to do this is exploit everything when possible. So with no limitations. It's a difficult question. So to have consensus in society, because there are people more in favor of development in the sense of creating capital, and people in favor of environmental protection and indigenous rights. So there are many interesting cases, and I think for we working with critical technology views, we may ask, does compensation and precautionary measures are good enough? So, or should we drop entirely the projects? I think many engineers depend on his jobs as well. So other engineers will refrain to pick up jobs in such branches, which is also an open, it's open to everyone to pick up a profession which is aligned with your political and ethical views. I would also recommend reading, I will recommend two Brazilian indigenous authors. One is Ailton Krenak. He's an indigenous activist, and he wrote a book called Delay the End of the World. So he's discussing sustainability in a critical view, and also the fall of heaven. This is a view of Yanomami shaman, written with an anthropologist, and it's a wonderful book to be able to approach other ways of seeing the world, because nature is so sacred, is so relevant, we can barely imagine with our Western views. And then last but not least, I would also see at positive examples, like how indigenous peoples inspired new trends in architecture, because their houses are much better adapted than Western classical architecture to the tropical areas. So with lighter structures, renewable resources, much cooler, without necessity of air conditioning all the time, which we're having right now in Brazil. This year was the hottest ever. And they built also inspired on community relationships, ideas, and cosmology, the idea of architecture that brings the community together. This is very interesting, a way of another way of doing, imagining buildings and working spaces and so on.
John, so many important resources that you mentioned. Feel welcome also to add them to the chat for those that didn't manage to take notes. And as you're mentioning Buen Vivir, I will also say that Cristiano Cordeiro Cruz from Brazil, your colleague, is also a co-author in one of his chapters and has been doing work in this area. Please, as I said, I think not only me, but other participants will appreciate having the names and some of the references in chat. I will take a break from my questions, although I do have many more questions, because I see that there are two questions that were raised. I want to give the floor to first to Paul Jones and then to Hugo Paris to ask their questions and interact with you. And Paul and Hugo, please introduce yourself before.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Jones. So I'm a PhD student. Yeah, I know I'm not that young. I teach as well, but a PhD student looking at the sort of soft skills, key attributes for engineers in the twin digital and ecological transitions in a context of internationalization. Yes, just that little subject. So thank you very much for your inputs. I know a little bit more about intercultural competencies, and so the question that I had was kind of related. Maybe I'll give the context a little bit first, which is that I've noticed that when we send students away on mobility, or when we do an internationalization at home activity with the students, that the cultures don't need to be kind of like too far removed from their home culture to disturb. I know that we had something on triggering, irritation, was a previous theme that we had. And it reminds me just of a little example that a Portuguese colleague gave me. He's from Angola, and he heads up part of a kind of like water engineering project, but that involves multiple countries in Africa. And he said, Paul, he said, I gave him a little introduction on cultural intelligence, which I think is maybe particularly relevant, could be an interesting complement for what we're discussing today. But he said, that in terms of things like political approaches and approaches to water engineering, that with these students, maybe cultural intelligence could be an interesting approach, because quite often they're kind of like fighting with each other in terms of how they should actually do things within this water engineering project, because they're all, they are from they have different insights and different approaches and different cultures, even though, we may sort of think, well, one could be very rude and say, oh, well, they're all African, so they must all be similar, but actually, no, not at all. And so my question was, to what extent can training in intercultural competencies, so adapting to cultural diversity, contribute to generating or to developing our dream, the whole engineer, with regards to sustainability?
Who wants to respond to Paul? And from what institution? Where are you doing your PhD, and
Yeah,
where
so
are you
sorry. Yeah,
teaching?
so I teach at the Université Savoie-Mont Blanc, which is a medium-sized university in France in the Northern Alps, about half an hour south of Geneva, and about an hour and a half from the border with Italy. So in quite an international sort of physical location.
Thank you. And I think we have a few connections in that area, and also in the growing space of French engineering ethics education that Hugo and his mentor, the pioneer Christelle Didier, is representing. Olga, Irene, John,
Yeah,
do
I'm happy.
you have a reaction? Yes, Olga. Or sorry,
Yes,
what did you, or Irene?
great. Yeah, this is Olga.
Olga, yes.
Oh, good question. I mean, I agree. I think intercultural, cross-cultural competencies are essential and a must. It comes down to how can we best sort of show our students and demonstrate and expose them to the learning experiences that will cultivate those competencies. I think it starts by the faculty and the educators really modeling the importance of those competencies. And so if that doesn't sort of start there for faculty to model those, I think that's where a challenge sort of begins. I know that while I was building and leading the build of Wake Forest Engineering, I intentionally recruited and invited historians, anthropologists, social scientists, policy experts to join our engineering classrooms. Because what I saw is that those competencies were lacking, especially with young faculty who had limited experience with the professional practice of engineering across cross-cultural contexts. And so we needed to sort of both use that as an opportunity to cultivate the faculty, but also broaden the learning experiences in the classroom for students to see. And what a great way to, again, model to students the way that engineers should work and bridge bridge connections with other disciplines that they simply, an expertise that they lack. And I think the best way we can do that is to model it and not pretend like we have all the answers and invite the experts that need to be part of the classroom there. But we also shouldn't. And then the second thing is that we shouldn't just talk about it. I mean, I think talking about it is one thing, but showing students what it looks like is also very important. So through experiential learning, students need to see what are the impacts of not having these competencies and what are the impacts of having these competencies. And so if we can do that through cases that are really elaborate and complex and show those intricate facets, then yes. If we can show them through projects where they can actually experience it themselves, even better, and use that as coaching moments to cultivate just a better engineer. So I'll just stop there and say yes, and I'm glad you're doing your PhD on the topic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and feel welcome to link to our community also for further initiatives to connect to our special interest group on ethics. I joined this SIG during my PhD, and now I am the co-chair, and I found it as an environment where I can grow my own projects and find a community interested in the same topic. So feel welcome to reach out to me and to Mircea, my co-chair, if you want to talk more about this. So this invitation is also for anyone in attendance who wants to be part of this community and to further work in this area, especially on topics such as, let's say, the global and the decolonial perspectives we are mentioning today, which need a strong presence in SEFI, in ASE, in other parts of the world.
Thank you, Dana.
Irene or John? Sorry, yes.
No, I was just going to say I just feel that the students, I don't know whether it's because of I suppose we can always blame COVID, for everything, which I don't think is particularly necessarily fair. But we have seen, for example, students have a decreased interest in things like mobility, which is what John was talking about the immersing yourself in a different community, in a different culture. And I just wonder whether to kind of like get students on the right track. Sometimes having students who actually work with management students or artists, as I think Olga briefly mentioned earlier on, but within the same national culture, because it seems to me that maybe going into kind of like other national cultures, talking about colonialism and post-colonialism, that there maybe needs to be kind of like a pathway to reach that ultimate goal that we're talking about. But that I'm just concerned that putting maybe students directly into something that is that different for them may not actually obtain maybe the results, and maybe there's a process through different sort of socio-professional categories within our own culture before actually maybe getting to some environments that are maybe a bit more extreme. Or maybe I'm just trying to be too nice to our students, and maybe these engineers are totally adaptable to different contexts.
Irene,
So
I see you having a reaction.
Yeah, well, you've emphasized a lot the aspect of mobility. I'm not sure if it's the mobility itself of going to a different university, because I guess so these discussions on colonialism can actually be already had at your host university. So I guess it's somehow linked to the growth of students and how they mature and they become maybe more self-reflective and how their identity as engineers evolves when they are moving, let's say, abroad for a semester or for a research project. So that might be, let's say, a key factor in that area. Maybe adding to what Olga mentioned. So, well, John talked about sustainability being a difficult concept to reach a consensus in. And actually, the truth is that it's difficult to find a unique solution, right, for sustainability, and just agreeing to disagree and empathy, which are somehow related to the skills that you were mentioning, right? And transversal skills are key aspects, which can be learned when you go abroad, but also by planning as educators activities that allow these confrontations, well, not confrontations, but these discussions, these healthy discussions between students, and which also as educators can be a bit challenging as well, because some conversations can be a bit difficult, and debates can lead to difficult conversations. But I think these kind of conversations need to be had, and they really enrich and help this transition to more culturally sensitive, let's say, identities as students. I was also interested with what you mentioned, Olga, about bringing sociologists and historians in class and in engineering. I found that that sometimes students didn't feel so engaged because they didn't see an engineer in front of them, even though they were interested in the topic. And what has worked, I'm interested to see what you think about that, but what has worked in my case is to bring students from different disciplines. So bringing a student maybe from the history department or from the sociology department, and putting them together with the engineering students to solve a common issue, such a research project or a hackathon. And that really helped in having these conversations, not only among engineering students, but also among social science students.
Yeah, I think that's Irene, that's a great strategy too. Just bring students from different disciplines together to challenge each other. And Paul, to your point, I think our job as educators is to make them uncomfortable a little bit, and that's the point, right? To do it gradually, because that's the way we prepare them for the real world. And so I kind of frame my teaching in that way from the very beginning, and say my role is to make you a little bit uncomfortable. And when I'm doing that, that's when you know I'm doing my job, right? Yeah, so Irene, to your point about when we bring kind of experts from other fields, how do we ensure that students, you know, remain engaged in that? I think it's really important. One thing that we've done is we collaborate with those experts very closely. We give them the context that they're coming into so that they understand this class is about this. Here's what we're trying to achieve with the learning. Here's your expertise. Can you help us connect the dots here? So it requires the faculty to work collaboratively together to make the material really authentic for students, and just in time to build those connections that students may not see, and invite that engagement so that we can sustain it. And we have established, through that, we have established partnerships with working with the history department for many years, because of that iterative approach of continuing to kind of integrate the knowledge that both experts are bringing to the table and to the learning, and to ask students for feedback and use that feedback to continuously improve what that experience will look like in the future. But we don't, you know, I think it's such an important thing for us to model as faculty, that we just intentionally need to make it work so that students see how engineers must model with these really good collaboration skills that really build cross-cultural, intercultural competencies and cultivate character.
John?
May I add something? Olga was speaking about putting the students in situations where they can make connections they didn't see before. I think this is a nice way of expressing. I had a student who participated in IDDS in Tanzania, Brazilian student, and he's doing now PhD in Belgium. And he told me that having this experience of being in completely different settings, He had experienced cognitive shiftings in the sense that engineers come with amazing solutions, but sometimes they don't work depending on the conditions and the cultural settings. And he was telling me that in Belgium, asked him in an interview if his cultural experience have had any impact in his PhD and so on, in his way of seeing engineering. He meant, well, I'm working in 5G, and it's not directly, but I have a toolbox. And I'm aware that my toolbox is more complex than most of my colleagues. My colleagues have only this standard book knowledge, and I'm very sensitive to so many factors when I'm thinking on solutions and questions. And so the experience of community engagement, the experience of cross-cultural action, broaden his mindset, making him a better engineer. So able to see more in a more multidimensional way, and looking at things that normally you don't look at. And just a short add, I don't think you necessarily need to go to another continent. This is an amazing experience, another language and so. But we are working with public schools at the periphery in my city, and I'm professor at an elite school. So my engineers are part of the elite. And this clash, this is also a cultural clash, because for my students, working hard is obvious, and we go to the schools and his pupils, they see no value in education at all. And so how do you deal with that? How you can build participatory projects with this kind of public? It is very interesting. So you don't have to go far away. You can find people at the margin in your own nations. And it includes Europe and the States, of course. Yeah, and you have different cultures in this sense of being of a different class and having different social biographies and so on.
Thank you. I want to share now Hugo's question. So Hugo says that he doesn't have a clear view on this subject, so the question may sound rather vague. He was wondering, how can we continue to address ethical and sociological questions in engineering curricula at a time of far-right movements taking power in USA, in Argentina, some examples Hugo gave. In other terms, how can we discuss with students about political conflicts and the need to teach critical thinking and ethics? And I'm thinking about some of these conflicts are also relevant to our topic of sustainability, when we see that there was the deal in place for a peace negotiation regarding a mineral transfer of minerals, so transfer of natural resources. What are your thoughts on Hugo's point? And Olga, you are now you are in the US, so we have speakers from different backgrounds, and
yeah, I think it's a really good question, and we live in a time where I feel like everything is being politicized and weaponized in different kinds of ways. But I think the ways that we can kind of really help our students is, through ethics. So various ethical lenses give us a mean of understanding how decisions get made. And I think it's very important and it's very urgent that we do that. So I think we can start. I know in the curriculum at Wake Forest, we oftentimes start with just giving them a glimpse of the various ethical lenses that guide us and influence the way in understanding how we make decisions, right? And I think it's important to understand how decisions get made and to unpack that from an ethical lens. A lot of what we do is also from a virtue ethic lens, and we talk a lot about character. And so we talk about how decisions can be made day to day to the bigger decisions, and what dimensions of character are visible or not visible in the way something was done, or maybe humanity was lacking, or maybe where collaboration was lacking at the cost of something else. And so I'll put a resource in the chat that has been very helpful for us, and it's a scholar from Canada who has developed a framework in helping us understand leader character. But it gives a very her work has basically said you can have all the competence you need, but when your character is lacking, this is where you will see a breakdown of so many things. And it gives us a lens upon which to understand and reverse engineer decisions that have been made, but also allow us to give students the means and the frameworks upon which to think how they can make decisions, from everyday decisions to just bigger, complex decisions that ultimately implicate politically. So I'll just do that.
Thank you, Olga. And may I take a spin on Hugo's question and ask you if there is a need to focus more on preparing engineering students as future policymakers to hit climate targets and to develop policies for ensuring more, let's say, to develop more climate-friendly policies. Who do we leave policy making related to engineering knowledge? In whose hands do we leave it if we don't prepare students?
Well, I guess this linking with what Olga said, so this is related to making sure that the students do not understand their role as engineers, not only just as technicians, but also as those that will be making decisions where engineering has actually an important role in society and can have devastating consequences. So just encouraging students to acting as agents of change, and encouraging them to actively question and challenging unethical, harmful practices in engineering, and advocating for alternative methods or speaking out against decisions that go against their values, which is not always easy. I think in encouraging students to be reflective in this way, something that I found very useful are ethical dilemmas. So case studies that actually show a specific situation where students are asked to make a decision based on a specific role they have. And actually, it's a very wicked problem, right? So making the decision on specific design of a project or the sourcing of materials, etc. I think Sarah Heath put in the chat a very good resource for that, which is the ethics toolkit. And in there you can find specific case studies that can be used to encourage this reflection from students through case studies such as dilemmas.
Thank you. And I want to give the floor to Colin Brown for your question, Colin. And please introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Diana. I've enjoyed the conversation very much, and you've touched on much of the answer to my question already. I'm interested in the difficulty of understanding the subject, balanced against the difficulty of teaching the subject. Because my experience has been that if you want to teach thermodynamics or soil mechanics, then you're writing on a blank page, a white page. You can do any techniques, and the students just lap it up because they want to memorize the subject. When you're teaching this sustainability and general engineering society, the students are anything but a blank page. They're bringing their own culture, their own backgrounds, their own ethical formats. And so I'm delighted that you're talking about the pedagogy as much as you're talking about the understanding of the subject. And my question really is, are we doing enough work on pedagogy, and is that in tandem with doing enough work on actually understanding the subject?
Well, I think you, Colin, you are doing enough work.
Oh, bless
But
you. I try very hard, but just to throw in one of the challenges, I'm a visiting professor at City St George's University in London, and one of the real challenges is that the economic basis of the university is on getting more students through it. It has no large endowments, it doesn't have a huge research base, and so it needs the income per student. And I feel that the pedagogy of this subject requires you to have very few students and a high staff to student ratio. And that seems to go against the basis of a number of teaching universities in the UK, for certain, who have very large numbers of students in order to just economically survive.
Thank you, and also feel welcome to share also your perspective from your role in the Royal Academy of Engineering, as there are localized initiatives, and we also had Sarah Heath in the room with us, who also has been instrumental in developing a toolkit with Engineering Professional Council. Anyone want to address Colin's remark or experiencing similar challenges in their own institutions? Or in this room, are we in a way lone wolves in our own institutions? In general, a few people who are working on these topics. I interrupted you, Olga, sorry.
No, you're okay, you're okay. It's a great question, and just a tremendous sort of ethical dilemma that I think faculty are positioned in, right? How do you balance the continuing sort of increasing size of classrooms and appropriately, if one desires to teach these competencies that require different pedagogies, how do you do that? I'll simply, because right now I serve as a program director at the National Science Foundation, which is a federal agency in the US that supports STEM education research. And pedagogy and research in pedagogy is a big area in the portfolio that we invest in. We know that there's strategies out there that can effectively work in both sort of small classes and large classes. And so strategies do exist, but it does take intentionality at the university level to invest in professional development and faculty development, and that's an important piece that is there to incentivize those behaviors, bring in that training, and reward it as well. Because if the reward structures are not in play, it's very easy to go back to the traditional model, which is simply to lecture at students. And I mean, I think the easiest pedagogical tool that we can use, that many have already pointed to, is case-based learning. And the moment we can make these cases a lot more complex and pointing to a lot more competencies, and it's much easier for an instructor to kind of pick that up and just integrate it than totally start from scratch. So I think that's one tool that has viability, but you're absolutely right that intentionality is needed at the institutional level to invest and to reward faculty for the effort that goes in to cultivate this different kind of student with the competencies that we know are essential for the future.
And I think UCL are leading in the understanding of peer review as a part of a teaching process. as well. So rather than it just being the onus of the teacher to transfer these ideas or to find out better ways to transfer, it's the peer review which allows the students to really understand the subject.
John, I see you wanting to respond to Colin.
Yeah, just a brief comment. Well, there are so many interesting questions about, we are working with around 100 students, the first year grade, undergraduates, with community engagement, but we have a team of 7 people working with it. And we have a very structured project and partnerships, and so it's possible if you can bring more people together. Some of them are volunteers and professors of other universities. In Brazil, we got recently the legal obligation, any university have to provide 10% of curriculum, engineering curriculum, with community engagement or extension work. So you have to work with sectors of society to impact society, to drive away a university just producing papers and working with high-tech industry, but also engage in environmental and social problems and solutions. This one interesting thing. So change the regulatory framework or the policy of your own university valuing extension works in the career of the lecturers and professors. I think when classes with too many students, they are, of course, you cannot recur to such intensive work methods. And study cases will be interesting solutions, because I think it's always interesting to connect ethics, and ethics is so a wonderful area to think about our humanity or lack of humanity in society, with concrete examples. And sustainability have so many concrete interesting things. We can speak more about later if wished. And I would say you can always partner with organizations which are specialized in providing community engagement and cross-cultural experience. A wonderful experience is in Engineering Without Borders Australia. We have a chapter about humanitarian engineering in our Routledge handbook. I would recommend you to read. So Engineers Without Borders is just one, and you have hundreds of initiatives. You can talk to students if you're interested. There are hundreds of initiatives all over the world where you can do internship. Engineering Without Borders Australia, they work very closely with Australian universities. So they have a path, and it's very interesting how they structure these partnerships.
And they have chapters all over the world, more or less active in different country settings. And we have 10 minutes left, and just let's say a brief question that links to what you're mentioning, John, about community engagement, but also picking up on Olga and Irene's point about who do we bring into the classroom. And I want to reverse the question is, how do we bring students out of the classroom, and what is the ethics of engaging ethically with communities for sustainable development education projects? I don't know, John, if that's a remaining raised hand. So if you have experience with engaging with communities and you want to share some insights on how not to be exploitative in bringing communities and maybe NGOs as educational partners, I would appreciate, and let's say we would appreciate your insights.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy. John, I don't know who was going to go. Go ahead.
You can go first, please.
Yeah, it's a great question, Diana. It takes time, to Colin's point. We have built partnerships with nonprofit community partners. We have built partnerships with even a local science museums, right? We've turned sort of the whole campus into a laboratory when our students do sensing projects, and we engage and connect them with partners across campus as students are developing a first-year project to sort of use different kinds of sensors for our diverse applications. So they're engaging with staff and facilities folks across campus as a way to connect directly with just outside stakeholders. And so for us, it was an intentional effort that started in year one of our curriculum. And it's something that we were really intentional building on all 4 years of the undergraduate engineering degree, and have partners. We bring in industry partners as sort of in progressing in junior, senior year, where the complexity of learning needs to sort of advance. We bring in engineers from industry to bring those examples in, or take students to those facilities in order for them to see a different angle of engineering practice. And so it just takes time and effort and intentionality to bring experiential learning to the classroom. And I'm just grateful at the fact that I was building a program from scratch, and I could basically institutionalize experiential learning across the curriculum and in every class, because we know that just talking about the right things isn't going to sort of make the difference, but actually doing it and being as close to the environment of impact that is needed.
Olga, John? Or Irene, sorry.
I can go. Linking, so I think one of the challenges, and Olga has mentioned it, and Colin mentioned it as well, is that in the end, these relationships or partnerships with NGOs are up to the program directors or even up to the professors. And it actually takes time to find, to build these partnerships and make sure that when students engage in these activities, either it's NGOs or local organizations, to make sure that these relationships are meaningful for the students, but also are based on ethics and responsibility values, right? And that's not always easy. So building this trust, but also making sure that students will be making a meaningful contribution to these organizations. Also, a point is we need to be cognizant that students, each of them is unique, so not all of them will be interested in doing, I don't know, a volunteering activity with an NGO on a particular project. So giving them a range of potential ways in which they can interact with these kind of activities or internships and projects, etc. So actually sustainability can be embedded in any project, right? So making sure that these partnerships we build with organizations range from NGOs, which you mentioned, Diana, but also local businesses, local governments, and even maybe bigger enterprises, and allow students to make a change in terms of sustainability there. But always, as I mentioned, making sure that these relationships are equitable between the two parts, the student and the other stakeholder.
And John, what are your thoughts or experiences with engaging with community partners?
I'm much aligned with Josa. It is interested to always have in mind a wide variety of possibilities. So depending on the competency and interest of the students, on your on institutional setting, what you are able to work on. One thing is more broadly, we have been working in Brazil with initiatives like popular engineering, as it's grassroots engineering and a social technology movement. And we have discussed a lot about how to build partnerships and participatory methodologies. So if you are interested, I published with Christian Cruz reflection about 8 dimensions of empowerment in social technical projects. This is also in this international journal, Engineering, Social Justice and Peace. In these dimensions, you can learn more about have some precaution before going out in society for not doing wrong. So quite a bit of reflection in all dimensions. And we can think not only social inclusion is interesting, but how to achieve participatory methodologies, how to build trust and care for each other, how to deal with power. If you come from a university to community vulnerability, how to share technical competencies so that the community, maybe some guys in the community are able to maintain the system if it is simple enough. And how to share the research project design. This is also very nice, so that people also feel more included and learn in the process to become citizens, and among other aspects. So you have many dimensions, and we should take care, because we can also disempower communities with very good intentions. And I think it requires some experience and care. Among the experience we have had here is one is very nice. A student of mine, he has won now Science and Woman Award in Science, Technology, Innovation, National Award. She was working with 2 colleagues in a NASA Apps Space Challenge about climate change, and develop software. So with gamification, and with us, she brought this software in schools, tested in schools, and it was amazing experience. How to bring in schools issues which the pupils often have no idea, no interest. It has very positive results. We have had partnerships with recyclable cooperatives, and a colleague of mine is working with social environmental entrepreneurship, also with a hospital waste and a women cooperative. So providing income, providing more sustainable use of waste. And I have a colleague also working with citizen science. We are engaged in the community in our city. It is a big city, 700,000 inhabitants, in issues of green spaces. So to make public pressure for more public and to conserve trees, and so with a platform, interactive platform. And another project I think is very
sorry,
interesting.
John, to interrupt you because we approach the end of the seminar and people would be preparing to leave. I just want to thank our fantastic free speakers. I learned so much. It was an inspirational meeting from me and to learn from you. And I hope we will see each other in this or similar formulas on 13th of May with John Mitchell, Dayun Kim, Gaston Meskans, Andreas Kotsios to discuss policy making and engineering. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.